Imagine this. You're one of the most powerful men in the world, a Roman senator. You've got money, power, respect. And now you're at a feast, gold, wine, pure luxury. The emperor stares at your wife, walks over, takes her by the hand, and leads her to his bedroom for all to see. So what do? Jump up, scream, defend your family's honor? No, you sit there, sip your wine, and smile, because if you say one word, you'll be dead by dawn. Then the door swings open, the emperor comes back, sits beside you, and starts loudly discussing your wife with the other guests, rating her, comparing her, laughing, and you nod along because you want to live till tomorrow. This is Rome. The year is 40 AD. Welcome to the reign of Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, or as the soldiers called him, Caligula. Little Boot, you heard that right. The most insane tyrant in Roman history was nicknamed Little Boot, a cute little childhood nickname. How did a sweet little kid adored by the army turn into this? Who made him this way? And most importantly, was he even really a monster at all? Or was this the greatest character assassination in history? To understand Caligula, you first need to understand his family. And trust me, compared to them, Game of Thrones feels like a bedtime story. Ahead of us lies a journey into the darkest corners of the human soul and the cruelest chapters of Roman history. Don't forget to subscribe. We're on our way to 5,000 subscribers, and a lot of people still watch without subscribing. So, it all started with a murder. 23 stab wounds, 44 BC Julius Caesar. That Julius Caesar murdered by senators. Why? He seized power in Rome and became its sole ruler. Before Caesar, the Republic's biggest decisions were made by the Senate, a gathering of Rome's richest and noblest citizens. Caesar turned the Senate into little more than an advisory council and made every decision himself. The assassins believed that after his death, they'd restore the old order and reclaim power. They were wrong. A civil war began, and the winner was Caesar's great-nephew, a young man named Octavian. He took the name Augustus, meaning the Sacred One, and by 35 became the first Roman emperor. He understood the key thing. You can take absolute power, just don't call yourself a king. Call yourself the first among equals, the princeps. The Senate loved it. Officially, the Republic still existed. In reality, Octavian ruled alone. Sounds like a happy ending. Nope, because beside him stood the most dangerous woman in Rome. When Augustus was 23 years old, he met 19-year-old Livia. The problem was that she was married and already had 2 kids. The solution for both was to get divorced, then married, and Livia's first husband sat at the wedding as the ceremonial father of the bride. They were basically family. Augustus and Livia began living in love and harmony. As historians say, it was a truly rare union of 2 completely heartless people. How romantic! Livia dreamed of seeing her son Tiberius become emperor. And many possible heirs kept dying under very mysterious circumstances. Coincidence? Or Livia's plan? Nobody knew. There was never any proof. In the end, there were no suitable heirs left. No one except Tiberius. Augustus had no choice but to appoint him. He knew who he was leaving in power, but there was no other option. Out of all this chaos, our hero, or rather the anti-hero, appeared. On August 31st, in the year 12 AD, a boy was born. His parents were Germanicus, grandson of Mark Antony, Cleopatra's lover, and Agrippina the Elder, granddaughter of Augustus himself. Naturally, they named him Gaius Julius Caesar. That's just how Romans were. Creativity with names was definitely not their thing. Romans only had around 18 male first names anyway, so options were pretty limited. Octavian Augustus was also technically Gaius Julius Caesar Octavian Augustus. His father, Germanicus, was basically the perfect man, a brilliant general, honest, noble, adored by the soldiers, the perfect heir to the throne. Agrippina was different, smart, ruthless, ambitious, hungry for power. She looked at her step-grandmother Livia and thought, I can do the same. No, I can do even better. So what could possibly go wrong? Germanicus was sent to command the legions on the Rhine, the empire's frontier, cold, mud, War. Noble Roman women usually stayed home in warmth with servants around them. Agrippina went with him to the military camp and even brought along 2-year-old Gaius. Why? She remembered the story of Julius Caesar, the general carried to power by his army, and hoped the soldiers would fall in love with her husband and son too. By the way, do you want an episode on Caesar? Comment below. We'll make. If you ask for it. The little boy ran around the camp in tiny armor. Agrippina had them specially made for him. They even made him tiny military boots. Caligula. The legionaries adored him and gave the boy a cute nickname. Caligula, little boot. Cute, right? It won't last long. Agrippina waited for Octavian Augustus to die so her husband could rise to power. And then it happened. But the new emperor was Livia's son, Tiberius. The crazy stuff's coming. Give me a second. Meanwhile, Caligula's father Germanicus was busy collecting taxes in Gaul. And when he heard the emperor had died, he acted with perfect loyalty. He swore allegiance to Tiberius. But the Roman soldiers serving under Germanicus refused to swear loyalty to Tiberius. They barely even knew who he was. But Germanicus, he fought beside them. And they demanded that Germanicus become ruler himself. They were ready to march on Rome with him and overthrow the new emperor. 8 legions, an absolutely terrifying force. Rome wouldn't even have enough troops to stop them. Agrippina was thrilled. She already saw herself as the emperor's wife, but she forgot to account for one thing, her own husband's opinion. Germanicus wasn't like that. He didn't want another civil war. He wanted peace for Rome. The legionaries threatened to kill him if he refused to lead the rebellion, so Germanicus sent pregnant Agrippina and 3-year-old Caligula away from the camp on foot. She was pregnant with Agrippina the Younger, Nero's future mother. The Roman colony was later named after her, modern-day Cologne, still its official Latin name today. So they walked away like common peasants. Picture the scene. A noble Roman woman, pregnant, carrying a child in her arms, slowly walking away. The soldiers who loved that little boy so much watched this happen, and their hearts suddenly trembled. Germanicus then delivered a fiery speech. "My wife and children, whom I would gladly sacrifice if it were truly needed for your glory, I now send far away from you in your madness. So this criminal fury may be satisfied only by my blood, and not by the murder of Augustus' great-grandson and Tiberius' own daughter-in-law." There's a reason the art of public speaking was seen as one of Rome's greatest skills. The legionaries repented, the rebellion was crushed, and Rome avoided both civil war and a dynastic crisis. The new emperor Tiberius was so impressed by Germanicus' loyalty that he gave him a triumph when he returned to Rome. Germanicus, his wife, and children entered the city in a golden chariot, victorious banners waving, prisoners marching in chains behind them. Huge crowds welcomed their hero. That image stayed in Caligula's mind because years later, as emperor, he tried to recreate it himself. The people's love for Germanicus made Tiberius furious. The following years became a slow political slaughter. Germanicus was sent off to the eastern provinces, Greece, Egypt, Armenia, supposedly to restore order, but really to keep him far from Rome. Tiberius feared how popular he had become. The whole family traveled with him. Little Caligula eagerly listened to stories about the great events of the past, marveled at the wealth of the eastern cities. But his father Germanicus, the darling of the Roman people, suddenly fell ill and died at 34. Suspicious? Very. Many believed he'd been poisoned on Emperor Tiberius's orders. Before dying, Germanicus begged Agrippina, "Stay quiet, don't provoke them." But Agrippina's fierce temperament wouldn't let her follow her husband's wise advice. Agrippina held the funeral rites and returned to Rome. Crowds gathered to meet her, a grieving widow surrounded by orphan children. There were already 6 of them. She clutched the urn holding her husband's ashes. It was heartbreaking to watch. People cried openly, and Germanicus was buried with honors. Neither Tiberius nor Livia showed up. Red flag? A massive red flag. Agrippina stayed in Rome, quietly raising her children. And in those days, a loving mother was considered the best education possible. That's exactly the upbringing Caligula received. He was well educated in literature. He spoke Greek fluently, was known as an incredibly gifted speaker, and rode horses well. He even trained with weapons and hand-to-hand combat and loved singing and dancing. So 7 years passed peacefully inside a loving family under the care of his mother. Maybe if not for what came next, Caligula would never have become who he later turned into. Emperor Tiberius was growing old, bitter, and deeply paranoid. He accused many nobles of treason and insulting the emperor, then threw them into prison. He forced senators to support even his most absurd delusions. He eagerly believed accusations, and there were plenty of them, including ones against Agrippina. Tiberius's followers, dreaming of taking the throne themselves, slowly tore the imperial family apart. People kept whispering to Agrippina, "The emperor wants you dead." At a banquet, Tiberius handed her an apple, but she refused to touch it and passed it to a servant instead. An insult to the emperor. An open admission of fear. Tiberius sent Agrippina away into exile. There she literally starved herself to death. Can you even imagine something like that? Tiberius had Caligula's 2 older brothers brutally killed. Caligula's sisters got luckier. They were married off to wealthy Roman nobles. And Caligula himself, still far too young to have been involved in any conspiracies, Tiberius decided to make his successor. He brought the young man close to him, partly to shield him from bad influences and mostly to make sure he stayed loyal. But the boy now had to live right beside the emperor himself, on the island of Capri. Imagine a paradise island turned into hell. Tiberius, already over 70, turned the island into a place of absolute depravity. Historian Suetonius wrote about orgies so twisted that honestly, they're hard to even talk about. An old goat licking young goats, that's what people used to say about him. Though the old goat wasn't only licking young girls, but boys too. And there, inside that nest of corruption, lived 19-year-old Caligula. Just try to imagine what that was like. He had to live beside the man who killed his mother, brothers. He had to watch all that madness, smile, and laugh at his jokes every single damn day. Caligula learned one thing: how to hide everything inside. When they told him his beloved mother had died, he didn't show even a trace of emotion. People at the time said the young man was either the perfect slave or the worst human being imaginable. Caligula became obsessed with watching executions. Was he thinking about his mother, dreaming of revenge, or had something inside his mind already broken by then? That was it. In the year 37, Tiberius finally fell sick and died. In his will, he named Caligula and his grandson Tiberius Gemellus as heirs. Caligula quickly made sure the will was declared invalid, of course only the part involving Tiberius Gemellus. Caligula was declared the sole ruler of Rome. Though he did adopt young Tiberius, pretending he saw him as his future successor. So now Caligula is 24 years old. He is the emperor of Rome, and the first 6 months feel like a dream. Caligula burned every accusation without even reading them. He abolished unfair taxes, held games and massive public spectacles, showed respect toward the Senate, restored public assemblies, and partially returned power to the citizens, published financial reports, transparent government spending. The people of Rome practically blessed him, especially since many still remembered Caligula's father, Germanicus, and they transferred their love from the father onto the son. Especially the soldiers, they were ready to die for him. Another admirable trait of young Caligula was his devotion to family. He brought the ashes of his mother, father, and brothers back to Rome and buried them with great honor at last. Caligula gave his sisters royal status and ordered every official oath to include the words, "May I never love myself or my children more than Gaius and his sisters." The young emperor also didn't forget his uncle Claudius. Claudius was Germanicus's younger brother, and people treated him like a fool and constantly mocked him. Caligula made his uncle a consul and treated him with exaggerated respect. Seeing this, the people changed their attitude toward Claudius too, shouting, Long live Caligula's uncle, and long live Germanicus's brother. Caligula paid special attention to construction. He built aqueducts, expanded harbors so more grain ships could enter them, and paid close attention to keeping roads in good condition. Roads have always been a painful issue in every era. The Romans finally breathed easy, but way too early. October, year 37. Not even 7 months had passed. Caligula became gravely ill. The people prayed. People made sacred vows. If the emperor survives, I'll give my own life. Others promised to fight for him in gladiator battles. Caligula recovered, and soon everyone regretted it. All his good qualities, emotions, and memories returned, twisted into something monstrous, like reflections inside a warped mirror. What happened to Caligula? Modern doctors suggest several possible explanations. Encephalitis may have caused irreversible brain damage. Epilepsy could have triggered severe psychosis. Lead poisoning from Roman wine may have slowly destroyed his brain for years. Wine was boiled in lead pots, creating lead acetate, a sweetener, and over time it damaged the nervous system, causing psychosis and much worse. But psychological trauma clearly played a role too. Imagine years of humiliation, fear, pretending, and then suddenly absolute power with no limits at all. No one left who could say no. All of his good qualities turned completely inside out. His love for his sisters twisted into unnatural desire. He slept with every one of them. He turned his uncle into a clown, humiliating and mocking him constantly, accusing him of conspiracies and threatening to kill him. Living in constant fear for his life, Claudius became sickly and looked terrible. His respect for the Senate turned into pure hatred. Caligula humiliated senators by forcing them to serve him at dinner. He dragged their wives into his bedroom during feasts, then came back and loudly discussed their looks and performance with the humiliated husbands. His contempt became so extreme that Caligula announced he planned to make his favorite horse Incitatus a senator. Though it may have been a cruel joke, every single day he searched for new ways to entertain himself. One day he'd throw insane feasts with food served on golden trays covered in real gold flakes. The next, he'd disappear into Roman bathhouses, where servants rubbed him with rare scented oils. Sometimes he would dress in women's clothing, wigs, jewelry, rich Eastern fabrics, and appear before the court disguised as different gods and goddesses. On Lake Nemi, he built enormous ships with ivory decks, multicolored silk sails decorated with precious gemstones and giant bronze statues. Lavish feasts and endless celebrations were held aboard those ships. In the 1920s and 30s, Mussolini ordered Lake Nemi to be drained, and there they discovered 2 giant Roman ships, each more than 70 meters long. They had marble columns, bronze decorations, mosaic floors, and even lead pipe plumbing. So these weren't military ships, but floating palaces, possibly used for religious ceremonies. Both were later displayed in a museum by the lake, but were completely destroyed during World War II. Caligula remembered his father entering Rome in triumph after defeating the Germanic tribes, and decided to recreate it himself. He suddenly gathered an enormous army and marched off to wage war against the Germans. He reached German territory, carried out some confusing military maneuvers, planned to invade Britain, and then suddenly changed his mind. So what did he do in the end? He ordered his soldiers to collect seashells along the seashore. Thousands of soldiers bent under heavy armor gathered seashells from the beach. Caligula announced these were trophies from his victory over Neptune. Then he held a triumph back in Rome. But there were no captured Germans, so he ordered Gauls to dye their hair and beards red and learn to speak German. They had to march behind his chariot, pretending to be defeated enemies. He also had strange obsessions about his appearance. The emperor wasn't handsome. Statues portray Caligula as a handsome, athletic young man, but historians describe someone completely different. Tall, pale, broad-bodied, with a thin neck and legs, sunken eyes, a wide, gloomy forehead, thinning hair, and a very hairy body. The emperor was deeply ashamed of his bald spot, so under penalty of death, nobody was allowed to look down at him from above. As contemporaries said, there wasn't a single poor or miserable person he wouldn't try to humiliate even further. Compared to Caligula, Tiberius suddenly didn't seem nearly as terrible. Sure, he executed anyone he suspected of treason, but at least those were nobles. Ordinary people in the city mostly lived pretty safe. But now, nobody anywhere in the empire felt truly safe anymore. Except maybe Caligula's favorite wife, Caesonia. She was 8 years older than the emperor and not considered beautiful, but Caligula was strangely devoted to her. People said he was drawn to her extravagance, shamelessness, and intense passion. While caressing her, Caligula once said, "I'm sorry I can't torture you to find out why I love you so much." Many suspected the emperor had completely lost his mind. Military commanders and senators at court plotted against him, dreaming of killing the mad ruler. The emperor answered with insane paranoia. He hated absolutely everyone. One day, according to Suetonius, he shouted, "Would that the Roman people had but one neck." Caligula even kept two separate notebooks. One was called Sword and the other one, Dagger. In one, he wrote down the names of people he wanted executed, and in the other, those he wanted driven to suicide. In the end, the sword and the dagger came for him instead. It happened in the year 41 AD. The young emperor was only 28 years old. The conspiracy was organized by the emperor's own closest servants. Leading them was a guard officer named Cassius Caria. The password chosen by the assassins was the word freedom. They attacked the emperor while he walked through a gallery from the theater back to the palace. The conspirators struck Caligula more than 30 times with swords and daggers. Hearing the noise, Caligula's wife Caesonia came running. She carried their little daughter Julia in her arms. Seeing the blood-covered emperor lying on the floor, Caesonia dropped beside him to her knees. She kissed him and swore eternal love to him. The conspirators slit her throat. Julia was murdered by smashing her head against a wall. Caligula's uncle Claudius became an accidental witness to the murder. Terrified, he ran away and hid behind a curtain. The conspirators found him there and fell at his feet shouting, "Long live the emperor!" And that was the end of Caligula's 4-year reign. He died beneath the blades of conspirators, just like his great ancestor and namesake Julius Caesar. But that's where the similarities ended. The darling of the army, the son of truly honorable parents. He could have become Rome's greatest pride, but instead became its curse. You know, dying in a conspiracy was actually the standard fate of the average Roman emperor. Around 60% of them were murdered one way or another, and another 10% died in battle. So dying of natural causes was more a lucky exception than the rule. But what if I told you almost everything we just discussed might actually be false, and instead part of a brilliant smear campaign? Question for you. How do you justify a coup and an assassination of a legitimate emperor? Simple. You turn him into a monster. Nobody wants to look like a murderer. It's much better to become Rome's savior from a mad tyrant. The senators who wrote history hated Caligula for humiliating them. They desperately needed to justify his assassination. Maybe that's exactly how the propaganda campaign began. Caligula the madman, Caligula the pervert. Every reform turned into insanity. But who actually wrote his story? Let's look at the sources. Suetonius wrote his 12 Caesars almost 80 years after Caligula's death, and he relied on sources that no longer exist today. That's a common problem with many ancient chronicles and records. Cassius Dio wrote nearly 180 years later. So what might have been invented? Those banquet stories with senators' wives. Caligula probably did publicly humiliate senators and openly flirt with their wives. But the sex stories were most likely literary exaggerations, a classic ancient technique for painting a tyrant. The incest with his sisters. He elevated his sisters to incredibly high status and allowed official oaths in their names. That was basically an unprecedented honor for women in Rome. And later, people may have interpreted that symbolically as incest. The war with Neptune, where soldiers collected seashells as trophies, was likely a distorted account of real military maneuvers. Caligula was preparing an expedition to Britain across the English Channel, possibly a training exercise, later turned into absurdity by rumor. The mass killings. They wrote that he killed people randomly, just for fun. So what do modern historians think? He really did execute senators. but mostly those tied to conspiracies against him. Caligula targeted political enemies. Yes, he ordered executions. Yes, he humiliated senators and took revenge for his childhood humiliations. But many other rulers acted the same way. He wasn't outside the norms of his era, yet only he became remembered as a monstrous killer. That famous line from Suetonius, "Would that the Roman people had but one neck," was probably added later. Like many famous villain quotes in history, too perfect for demonization. So why was the myth so strongly entrenched? Because Romans loved moral lessons. A story about a kind young man driven insane by power. That's the perfect cautionary tale. Over time, Caligula became the archetype of the mad tyrant. But if we strip away the propaganda, remove the jokes, satire, and political bias, who's left? A 24-year-old deeply traumatized young man who watched his family destroyed and grew up in fear. 6 years of pretending on Capri, where every day could have been his last. Maybe he really was mentally ill, epilepsy, encephalitis, lead poisoning. A man handed absolute power suddenly, with no preparation at all. So what is this? A tragedy? A man broken by the system, then blamed for being broken. He wasn't some innocent victim, like I already said, but the image of a completely insane monster was most likely hugely exaggerated, because history is written by the winners. Don't forget to subscribe.